So he's kneeling over my chest, and he has his hands in my hair, and he's hitting my head off of the floor. I thought, this is how I die. From about second grade, I knew that I had to break out of this somehow. It may not be obvious at first, but you have a choice in how you're going to respond to it. What could possibly be the positive lesson from having a father that reads to you from a satanic Bible? I'll give you that lesson.
All right, welcome to Unbroken from the Ashes, and this is going to be episode 3. I am James Ash.
And I'm Jessica Ash.
And today, we're going to talk about you a little bit.
Great.
So before we do that, let's do some little updates on what's going on.
Well, we're in a different location.
We are back in Arkansas. So not too long ago, I posted on Instagram and Facebook, and I said I wanted people to ask us some questions, some things they wanted to know about us, kind of like an open Q&A. And there was this little girl named Harper, and her question was, what's your proudest moment as a police officer in police work? We're dealing with people on their hardest days, and I'm often responding to bad situations. So some of the things I'm proud of was, responding to someone who was shot 7 or 8 times and feeling really good that I did really good medical care and gave them a chance. Some of them made it, some of them didn't. But the things that make me the proudest are when I have some kind of tangible feedback from like a victim of a situation. I talked earlier in one of my episodes about how I grew up in an abusive home, and one of the days that I remember the most is when the cops came and took my dad away. And I remember thinking, my mom's going to live tonight. This is a good thing.
Right.
And so when, I respond to things like domestic violence cases, those are hard calls, and there's often no perfect resolution to those. But when a victim in a situation comes back, sends me an email or writes the department and says, hey, because of James, I felt like someone cared. You can't undo the damage that was done, but that kind of feedback was really important.
I can totally see that. It's not too dissimilar.
Right. The other really cool thing that I feel really proud about is a lot of the behind the scenes thing, where I'm an instructor for our department, and a few months back, one of our sergeants came up to me and goes, hey, that handcuffing thing you showed us when the bad guy's on the ground and he's got his hands tucked underneath him and he's really fighting hard to keep his hands hidden? He's like, I did that thing you showed me and it worked. And this guy was a lot bigger than me and he was stronger than me, but the technique worked. That made me feel really proud.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing, that's really what stands out in my mind.
Oh, absolutely. I can see that.
Yeah. As a firefighter, I think my proudest moment was that opportunity to deliver that baby.
That's right.
That was really cool.
It was in a car, right?
No, it was at their house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Okay.
they called and said they were in labor. We get there, and I got there. The medics got there with me, thankfully, because they had like the absorbent pads and whatnot. But we were just playing catch. It was right away.
You played catch. Well,
Yep.
with your history of sports ball, I'm happy that you didn't miss.
It's a valid point. So let's talk about you, your background, who you are. But let's start back at the beginning. Let's go back to, what's your first memory?
My first memory. Oh, my earliest memory was shame-based.
They often are either shame or fear based.
Right. I have two earliest memories. both of them, I would have been probably 3 years old or late 2-year-old I know that because of where we lived. We moved so much. My memories are associated with a physical location, so I know the age. So the earliest was I was potty trained, and I had to go pee, but we didn't have our own bathroom in our apartment. We were staying in a place where there was a shared bathroom with other residents in that building, and I was too small to reach the latch on the door to go out into the hallway to that shared bathroom. And there was no one else home. So, and maybe they were just outside or down the hall. I don't know. Right. I just know that at that moment, no one was there. And I remember crying and kicking the door and screaming, and I ultimately peed my pants. Oh. And that is why I remember it, because I felt shame from that. I'm the only one who seems to remember this thing happening. Yeah. But that's my earliest memory. The next earliest memory was this again. My father was still, my biological father was still with us, and he had a record player. So this would have been like 1978 or 79, probably 79, and he had like AC/DC or something like that on the record player. Right. And he told me at some point, apparently, to never touch his stereo equipment because that was his prized possessions. And I guess maybe I did at some point because he came home and he turned on his record player and it was playing really fast. So it sounded like chipmunks. and so he sat me down and, was like reprimanding me for touching, I guess I must have touched the toggle between like the
different diameters of the...
Right. I don't remember, 33s, 45, I don't remember. Right. But he told me, if you touch this again, I'm going to kill you. And then I remember asking questions like, what does that mean? Will I wake up? And so then he started to explain to me, no, you'll never wake up. You'll never see your mother again. You'll never see me again.
So he said this not like facetious or exaggerating. He was actually threatening you.
I think so.
Right.
Because he was explaining to me that what it would be that to be dead.
Wow.
So I was very afraid.
Yeah.
I never touched that stuff again.
Yeah.
So I was pretty afraid.
Tell me more about your dad.
Okay. He dropped out in 9th grade. I think he must have had horrible things happen to him as a little kid. He was very much a rebel, and he would brag about his rebellious stories. So I know some of his old stories, and it would be like, I remember when we got a new principal, which was once his principal in middle school or high school. And he was telling me, oh, I remember him. I stabbed him with a pencil, and that's why I got expelled. Like so, wow. So he had these stories.
Yeah.
So he's definitely a troubled youth, and was addicted to drugs, and connected with my mother when she was in 11th grade. She ran away with him in 11th grade when she was pregnant. I think he was a sociopath, and there's specific reasons why I believe that. He never would have been diagnosed, or he wouldn't have seen any doctors ever. But he, tortured animals, would feed them drugs, invite over his friends, put them in a cage, watch them fight. He did that.
He put his friends in a cage?
No. The animals. Okay. Like he caught a duck fishing, so he put the duck in a cage with our cat. And, gave them various drugs. And that duck kicked the shit out of that cat.
Wow.
But, depending on what drugs you give them.
Right. A duck on meth probably would have some strange behaviors.
Right. So he would do things like that. And that was kind of his baseline. He was very enamored with Satanic stuff. And, I kind of thought it was like all a show. Like he loved horror and stuff like that. And not that there's anything wrong with that. But
Right.
our house looked like it was decorated as a haunted house year round. And so he really glorified that kind of stuff. And he did eventually feed me drugs to kind of see what would happen. He did this on several different occasions that I remember. And it would be, there would be this whole, you can't tell anybody this, you can't tell your mom this, that type of thing. So he would kind of exclude me from everyone else and remove me from any other from other people, and then swear me to secrecy. So I didn't know what I was doing was wrong.
Right.
I just knew that this is something I couldn't tell anybody. And it wasn't until another time, when I was later in my 9th year, that I started to understand more what was really happening.
So this was before you were 9?
Yes.
So what was that like for you? I mean, that experience of being fed a substance and then something happening, some kind of change happening or a feeling. What was that like for you that you remember?
Well, I remember one time he gave me pills, and then I ran up and down the stairs 12 times, 3 flights, 12 times, because I couldn't sit still. Like I was like bouncing off the walls. And
Was that scary for you, or what was that like for you?
Well, at first I thought like a grown-up. I felt like I'm doing the things that the grown-ups are doing. And so that wasn't scary. But when I felt that jitteriness that I couldn't control,
Yeah.
that made me just start sprinting up and down stairs, then I got scared because I didn't know what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was going to have any effect at all. I just thought I was doing a grown-up thing.
Right.
And so then it got scary. And when I came back and he's like, what have you been doing? And I told him, he laughed so hard. He thought it was the funniest thing.
Wow.
And so he would do this for his own amusement.
Yeah. You were just kind of an experiment for him.
I think so. And he beat up my mom a lot.
I was going to say, I want to hear more about the interaction between your parents and more about your mom. Like, let's dig into some of that a little bit.
So I think she had a rebellious streak, and she felt like bullied a lot as a kid. And so he gave her attention, and I think that was how she got ensnared in this whole thing. I think she tried to avoid the hard drugs.
Yeah.
Like I never actually saw her doing cocaine. I've seen him do cocaine plenty of times. And, they were definitely, getting high all the time.
Sure.
In fact, they got high so much. When I was in kindergarten, that was when there were all these TV ads and signs saying, like the Ghostbusters sign with the line through it.
Yeah.
And with the cigarette in it saying no smoking.
Right.
And it was really all over TV and commercials. And so I thought as a 5-year-old that cigarettes were illegal. And so we were in kindergarten and my teacher was talking about cigarettes and how smoking is bad. And I was like, yes, smoking is bad. Cigarettes are legal. And she's like, no, they're not illegal. You're just not allowed, it's not recommended. And I got in an argument with my kindergarten teacher because I said, but weed is legal. You can smoke weed. Everyone smokes weed. Everyone I know smokes weed, but cigarettes are bad.
Wow.
And she was like, well, I don't think that's how that works.
Yeah, that says a lot about the environment you're in, though.
Yeah, that was just normal. That was very normal.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of people in and out of the house because they also were dealers too.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of people in and out of the house, and there's a lot of shady stuff happening. And there people passed out or whatever all the time, and so, but they weren't terrible people to me, to be honest. I think I was fortunate that there's people who go through a lot worse than what I did. My father, he did some other things like he would read to me from a Satanic Bible, and he would pose questions to me like, well, if God is all good, why do people commit murder?
Right.
And, and so I was ill-equipped as an 8-9-year-old to
Right.
handle these kind of
Right. Those
questions.
deep philosophical debates.
Right. And so it really made me question every authority. Like, he was teaching me to question authority. And obviously he was, he read, he had this whole book with like the 10 commandments of Satan and like
Wow.
crazy stuff. And and I didn't understand that this, this was an unusual thing. I'm thinking I'm actually getting attention from my dad.
Yeah.
Is what I thought. Like, he's actually sitting me down and giving me attention, which didn't happen very much. So to me, this was like a cherished moment. And a few months, and of course he swore me to secrecy.
Of course.
And a few months later, the lady that lived in the apartment downstairs from us, different places. So now I'm 9 years old. She was, this was right after a big fight that my mother had with him, and he beat her up. And I think he was on heroin at this time. And so, because he was always trying to steal the welfare money from her. And things started to disappear, like, because the stereo equipment was being pawned off and stuff like that. So I had a chalkboard that was leaning against the wall in the hallway, and I was drawing on it while my mom was talking to the neighbor lady. And then I hear the neighbor lady say, "Oh my God, what is she doing?" And they come over there and they're looking, and the neighbor lady is like demonstrating to my mother, like, this is bad. And so then my mother understands
Because you were drawing on the chalkboard?
I was drawing on the chalkboard. What I was drawing was a pentagram. And, so then they start, where did you learn that? And I'm like, no, I don't know, because I'm sworn to secrecy. Like,
Right.
What do you think that is? And I'm like, I'm drawing a star. That, that's all I know.
Right.
I was drawing a big giant star with little stars all around it, because I was drawing the night sky. And so I didn't really understand what I was doing. And so then they interrogated me, and finally I'm like, yeah, Daddy showed me this. And then I started to admit to some of the things that he had told me. I admitted to some of the drugs he had given me. And that was, I think this was some of the stuff that pushed my mother to finally gain the courage to get away from him. Because she was battered, and she fed into it, just like all, domestic situations. Both people have a role to play, and so she had a role to play in that, but she was also fearful for her life.
Sure.
She has a story of when I was 5 years old. At that point, I had a little sister, and she was pregnant with my brother, and he crawled on top of her while she was sleeping and held a butcher knife to her neck. Wow. And laid there for like a half an hour telling her over and over again, if you leave me, I'll kill you. If you leave me, I'll kill you. So she was terrified of him.
Right.
And I think once she realized that, that he was now doing these things to the kids, I think that was where she started to get courage to make that break. And shortly thereafter, they got in the worst fight, which is the one where, he would like body slam her and spit on her and things like that all the time. And so that was a very vivid, the thud of her body hitting the floor. These things are very vivid. Yeah. But this fight was when he had her pinned on my brother's bed. It was like a large closet that became his bedroom. And he was strangling her. And my sister, who would have been, at this time, she was 6. We were changing into our pajamas when this whole fight broke out. So she still had her pajamas in her hand, and she's in her underwear, and she ran up behind him, and she's hitting him with her pajamas, saying, "Get off my mom." And I remember I was frozen. I was so scared. I was just frozen and just crying. And he stopped, he let go of my mother, and he turned around to punch her, and he stopped when he like sees this little kid, and you could like slowly see recognition come across his face. And he said, "Don't hit me, it's her fault." And so that was, that fight was the worst fight. I drew pictures of it, and
Wow.
I don't know how we weren't taken from.
Yeah.
I don't know if CYS existed back then.
Right.
You know, but there's so many stories. When I was one, they did get arrested apparently and got off on a technicality, like apartment A versus apartment B or something like that.
Oh, the warrant was written wrong or something.
That's how I understand it. The word warrant wasn't used when I was told this story.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I think there was a lot of near misses where we could have ended up in foster care.
Wow.
But we didn't. And when I was 9 years old, my mom, shortly after that last big fight, she got the courage to change the locks, and then she went through the police and was utilizing them to like get him away from the house when he would show up and be yelling outside and things like that. So there was a lot of scenes,
Yeah.
but she did it. She got away.
Earlier, you said you moved around a lot. Why is that?
So before I was 10 years old, I think we moved 11 times. And I remember this because when she took us to the little, indigent welfare clinic for our checkup, the secretary got mad at her because she's like, "I have to do your files over again." And so,
Yeah.
and during that exchange, I learned that we had moved 11 times before
Wow.
I was 10 years
Wow.
old. Because I don't remember them all.
But why?
Because we couldn't afford to live anywhere. So it was either we were getting evicted or bill collectors. And they were all like beaten down crack house kind of places.
Right.
Like almost like I've taken you driving through that old neighborhood, and I'm like, I used to live there, and there's a vacant lot. It burned down shortly after we left. And I used to live there in that vacant lot, in like place after place.
Yeah.
They're gone.
Right.
Or they were torn down.
Condemned.
Yeah. And then between the age of 10 and 11, we finally got into the housing projects. And that was like, yes. Because like they were made of brick.
Yeah. It was an upgrade.
It was an upgrade. Absolutely, it was an upgrade. And I wasn't, everywhere we lived, God, I'm embarrassed. Like we always had roaches. We always tried to fight against them, but it was, it's never ending, We didn't have new clothes most of the time. Eventually, my mom, she would do some deals and get some extra money, and so we can at least get some extra clothes at the beginning of the school year. But most of our clothes were given to us, or they were bought at the Salvation Army. So this was kind of a, when we got into the projects, that was like a solid win. And then we stayed there until I hightailed it out of there when I graduated.
Okay. So you were there through high school then?
I was there all through high school.
What was your best memory from these early years? Like from your first memory up to, let's say, when you got to the projects and that time frame, what was your best memory? The thing that stands out is like, wow, that was good.
The first thing that popped into my head was when I rode my bike for the first time without training wheels, and I didn't fall.
That's awesome.
I mean, I would go 10 feet and fall. But the first time that I actually like went, we didn't have a yard, and but we there was an alleyway, and so I would try to ride my bike over and over again in this alleyway. And the first time I was able to do it without training wheels, that was like the biggest accomplishment. So I don't know. That's what popped into my head as the best one.
Yeah. And so when your mom finally had the courage to kick your dad out, I know your mom had another boyfriend at some point. Was that kind of was that a narrow time frame of a time between people, or was that right away? Was that a long time? Tell me about this in between time.
Okay. after my mother got the courage to get away from my father, there was a transition period where she would have a boyfriend and then he didn't work out, but she ultimately started dating the man that I refer to as my stepdad.
Mm-hmm.
And I either call him so he ended up doing a bit of crack. So he didn't look like a crackhead because it was kind of intermittent, but he had various addictions, but he was very instrumental in helping me establish what are going to be my values. So the crack addict was the good daddy.
I gotcha. Well, there's a lesson there. Like, you don't throw the baby away with the bathwater. You can learn something from anybody.
Absolutely. And I have something positive about every one of these things that have happened to me.
What was the positive thing about your biologic father?
The biggest thing is he was evil. And that was clear to me. It was black and white.
It wasn't confusing.
No. And that was a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
I think had it been more confusing, it would have been much harder for me to break out of that. Or I would feel much more, I would put the responsibility on me, because kids do that.
Right.
And I didn't, because I knew he was evil.
Mm-hmm.
And it was black and white, and I knew from about second grade, I knew that I had to break out of this somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was clear to me. I didn't want to live like them. I didn't want to live in poverty. I didn't want to have roaches. I didn't want to be dirty
right.
anymore.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be the people that other kids, would stay away from, and because you're dirty or what, I didn't want to do that anymore. And so it was easy. So the benefit was he was bad enough that it gave me the drive to change that situation,
mm-hmm.
without completely breaking me where I would be unable to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest lesson that I got from him. And there's a lot of other little lessons. For example, I've said this on Cody's podcast. There was a time where I was bringing home straight A's. I was in second grade, and he said, "Oh, this is amazing. I can't believe my kid is smart. And when you grow up, you're a girl, so you're gonna be either a model or a teacher, because that's
all a woman can do.
That's all, right? If they're working,
right?"
And he goes, "But you might be able to be the first woman president."
Mm-hmm.
And the most far-fetched thing he could possibly think of. But what that did for me is it kind of like released me. It made me realize I can do things, whatever it is I want to do, if I worked really hard at it.
Yeah.
And so
it broke you out of that box.
Yes. And so from that day, I didn't put myself in a box in terms of what I wanted to be when I grow up, and what I would, I would find a way to get to where I wanted to be. And, but so he was just, being stupid, but there was a lesson in that I took and I ran with. And so that's what I mean. Like there's a lesson in everything. What could possibly be the positive lesson from having a father that reads to you from a satanic Bible? I'll give you that lesson. That lesson is he taught me to not believe anything blindly.
Yeah.
It made me learn to question everything.
And ultimately, it probably made you a critical thinker.
It made me I mean, I had to learn critical thinking on my own,
Right.
but what it meant is I didn't just blindly believe anybody, including him,
Right.
especially him.
Yeah.
But it made me question, what I was told. Why is this rule made? Why is this law made? Does this make sense? Maybe it doesn't. And so there's so many examples, and it made me then seek out better alternatives to whatever the situation was.
That's an amazing gift. I won't lie, I'm envious of that, because I was taught to blindly follow, to blindly believe, to blindly just go with what I was told, and it did a lot of harm to me. And that's a beautiful gift.
Right. It's a challenging gift, though,
Sure.
because, it also meant my faith, my belief in God is a very tumultuous journey that I am still on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's definitely downsides to that. But
Sure.
but I'm always seeking, what is the positive lesson? And there was a positive lesson. There has to be, because if I can't find a positive lesson, then I'm left sitting around feeling like a victim.
Right.
And I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. So tell me about your stepdad.
So, Stepdad, he, just my real father, played in a heavy metal band called Death Vengeance. Stepdad had his own heavy metal band called Disturbance. And so our lives continued to be, all about music and heavy metal and, playing these, local scenes and
Sure.
things like that.
Yep.
And but he worked. He was a construction worker. He did framing, so he had a work ethic, and he would talk to me all the time. He would sit down and say things like, "Jess, I'm not telling you to clean your room because I just want to sound like I'm being bossy." He's like, "I'm telling you to clean the room because if you do it now and you get in a habit, when you're a grown up, you'll just naturally do it. And you can invite people over and not be embarrassed. Wouldn't that be nice if you could not be embarrassed by where you live?" And so little things like that, he was, dropping these nuggets that I really took to heart, in part because he was actually engaging in dialogue with me and not just
Right.
talking at me.
Yeah, he was mentoring you.
He was. And now, he's not a good guy, but there was so many incredible lessons that I learned from him. I think he wasn't as good to the younger siblings, particularly my brother.
Yeah.
My brother has some stories that he can't even complete without stopping the story because they're so painful for him. But for me, I was in the right place at the right time. I was able to garner a lot of values, and what he taught me was, don't just look back at what happened with your father as you're a victim. He actually would sit down and say, what can you learn from it?
Wow.
There's something you can learn from it. There's always something you can learn from it. And so we would sit down and talk about, well, what can you learn from this? And then if I had something happening in school, some interesting project, like, when you throw the egg out of a window for physics class,
Right.
he would be like, okay, let's just do them. Let's go try. So let's go get a dozen
Wow.
eggs and do it together.
That's really cool.
And so I think there's so much that he gave me, so many gifts that he gave me, but there's also some really serious negative things there too. So I'm not, I can't put him on a pedestal.
Right.
Won't put him on a pedestal.
Yeah.
But, the crackhead was a lot better than the heroin addict.
Do you want to go into any of those negative things? Save it for another day?
I think I'll save it for another day.
Okay.
They were things involving how I valued myself and my sexuality.
Yeah.
They're long stories.
Yeah, that'll be a conversation all by itself.
It'll be its own conversation. Yeah.
So it seems like your stepdad, unlike your biologic father, was more not black and white, but more gray.
Yes.
Was that hard to manage?
Very hard to manage because I loved him and I hated him. And that was so much more difficult than, rationalizing my real father. And, one of my survival techniques that is, both a blessing and a curse is if someone's really toxic in my life, I've learned to just cut them out. You give them a few chances, and if they stay toxic, you got to cut it and let them go.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to do that with my father. And I gave him multiple chances.
Right.
I was 14 and I went to visit him, and he actually had a paper route, and he stole my paper route money
Wow.
out of my purse. And then I didn't see him again for a few years after that because I was so upset. And right after I graduated, he didn't even know I was graduating. I was graduating valedictorian. He didn't have any idea or care. But shortly after that, his sister lived in the same housing project as us. So I saw him leave her house with a bunch of VHS tapes in like a grocery store bag.
Sure.
And I happened to see that they were my mother's tapes that she had lent the sister. And so I stopped and I'm like, wait, you can't take those. Those are my mom's. And he just immediately started, F-bombing me, telling me she's a C word, I'm a C word. And I'm like, wow, love you, Dad.
Yeah.
Give me those. And I had one more try when I was in college where I had called him, and I because I needed to know before I cut him off completely. I just had to test it one more time. And geez, within 2 minutes of talking to him on the phone, he was calling my mother names, and I'm like, do not call my mother names. And then he told me to fuck off, and he hung up on me.
Wow.
So that was easy.
Yeah.
That was black and white, easy. I didn't see him again until the day before he died.
Yeah, I remember that. I was there for that.
Yeah.
He gave you a gift.
He did. So he had cancer, liver cancer. He probably had hepatitis, which predisposes you to ultimately get, liver cancer.
IV drug use will do that.
Yes. He did a lot of needle sharing and stuff. And so I knew we got the call through like aunts and uncles and stuff, and we find out like he's end of life. And so I decide, and I'm literally, 44?
Yeah.
43 years old. And I hadn't seen him since I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
Other than like in passing, I've seen him. He didn't see me kind of
Right.
thing. And so I find out an address. I go there. This building had the front window had plywood over it.
Yeah, it was all boarded up.
It was a freaking crack house.
Yeah.
And you open the door and there's a mattress on the floor. Why pay for a bed, right? So they had this old nasty thing on the floor, and the stereo was still there.
Mm-hmm.
It had the reel-to-reel.
Yeah.
And it was a nasty, nasty, dirty place. You didn't want to touch anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was freaky because I'm like, oh my God, you, James, were seeing this was what I grew up in.
Yeah.
This is how I lived. And it was tough. But anyway, I was like, look, he's going to die. I don't know who he is now.
Right.
I don't know anything about him.
Make amends or some kind of closure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at him, and he's emaciated and, clearly very, very sick, and obviously very aged. And I think, and like my healthcare worker side of me kicks in, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm like, you're supposed to hold their hand, and like, he doesn't deserve this at all.
Yeah.
But I went over and I kneeled on the floor next to him, and I held his hand. And I thought, I'll just sit here for a few minutes and give this dying man this gift. And then he coughed, and it was a very deep, nasty cough. Sputum came out everywhere, all over his chest. And it was like in my face.
Yeah, it was like projectile lung butter.
Yes. Yeah, it was. It actually was.
Yeah.
That's what it looked like. And in that moment, I thought, what did he just expose me to?
Yeah.
Because as a healthcare worker, like, you know. And I'm like, oh my God. And there's no going back. Like, it happened, and I couldn't change it at that point. Mm-hmm. So I, just got away from him, go sanitize my hands. And we stood there for a little bit longer and watched the vultures come in, figuring out what they were literally taking shit.
Yeah. They were scavenging before he was gone.
Before he was even gone. And that was hard to watch, but I have nothing to do with them. I have no place to say or do anything. And I certainly don't want any of that stuff. Probably roaches all through it, and so we left, and 2 months later, for the first time in my life, I popped positive for having been exposed to tuberculosis, and I wasn't even practicing at that time.
Right.
So there is no other way
right.
I could have been exposed. Yeah. And when you talk to healthcare workers who get exposed to TB, they know. They almost all of them will say, I know the moment. Mm-hmm. I was in the ICU suctioning, and I didn't have my protective gear on because that person was going down fast, and right. They coughed on him. Yeah. Like, they know the moment. Yep. And that was my moment. Yeah. So and he died a couple days later, and so now I have inactive, quiescent. It's not active, but I was exposed to TB, and there's like a 5% chance that at some point in my life, if I ever become immunocompromised, it could wake up.
Right.
So I wish I did not go to his deathbed. I should have stuck to my guns and kept him cut out. But then I might have regretted it.
Yeah, you'd never really know.
Right.
That's hard. Not dissimilar to you, I moved a lot. And in those moves, I've become very comfortable just letting people go in my life. Between the military, moving around, and moving before the military, losing things and losing people, I've gotten very comfortable with. I lost all my toys and books in a flood once, like, just to say, hey, reset, we're starting over.
No attachment.
No attachments, no connections.
Stability.
No stability. Right. I got very comfortable with that. And so that concept of cutting people out, I have some heartache doing that, but it's not uncomfortable. Like, it's
but the people closest to you, I think you do have a hard time.
I would have a hard time with, I'm certain for the people closest to me, when they cut me out or I have to cut them out, that's very hard. Yeah. But
the more peripheral people, easy.
And I found that I often don't let people close to me. I keep everybody at bay, and I let a few people close. So that way it can easily just cut everybody else off and not have to worry about those connections. But those few that get close to me, that hurts when they go.
Right.
So you practiced as a physician assistant for 16 years.
I did.
How did you go from being fed drugs in a crack house by a sociopathic dad to becoming a very successful in your profession, successful financially, successful as a mother? How did that bridge get formed?
Okay. So I told you in second grade, I was freed from the box of what I could be when I grow up. And I remember I had this project at school of what do you want to be when you grow up? And you had to draw a picture of it, and you write it on these lined papers. We learned how to print and write cursive back then. And I had this image in my mind, and I drew it of being in a white lab coat. And I thought I was going to look through microscopes and stuff, like nerdy stuff, and be a scientist. And so that was I ended up having a white coat, but not being a scientist. And my mother kind of laughed at me when I told her this, like how fanciful, how cute,
Right.
that you want to be a
Nice dream.
yeah. And she said, Jessie, you would have to go to college, and we don't have money. And I'm like, okay, college costs money? Yeah, college costs money, and I can't pay for it. So the only way you're going to go to college is if you get a scholarship. And I'm like, okay. I don't know.
You're second grade.
Second grade. I don't really understand what any of this means, but that's what I'm going to do. And all I knew is if I kept getting straight A's, I would get a scholarship. And I mean, obviously, as I got older, like I learned a whole lot more, but that was where that seed was planted. In 6th grade, my mom's little sister, she was the first one in all of my family to get into a college. And I was the first one to graduate college, but she was the first one to go to a college. And she did this incredible thing. She brought me with her. Like I was off for, like Easter break or something. And she brought me with her onto her campus. And I sat in on a philosophy class with her. And then I saw these grown-ups, these college kids, sitting around talking about stuff. And they were creative and thinking outside of the box. It wasn't just didactic learning.
Right.
And I was just like, whoa, this is amazing. And so that fire of getting an education beyond, what I was getting, was really, really lit then. And that was in 6th grade.
Okay.
And then, so I knew I wanted to go to college, and I knew I had to get a scholarship. And it was in the beginning of 10th grade that my guidance counselor, he would always keep a really close eye on me because he knew
Things were trouble.
Yeah, he knew the kind of trouble that was in our house. So he was always kind of, trying to make sure I wasn't taking a bad path. And so he came and talked to me. This time his purpose was to tell me, like, Jess, I got this news for you. We tallied up everyone's GPAs and did the ranking, and you're number 3 in your class. You're 3rd place in your class.
Most people would be very happy and content with that.
Right. Oh, he was telling me this to pump me up.
Yeah.
He's like, she's got to know this because this will really motivate her.
Yeah.
And let her know that she's doing the right thing.
Right. And
so he tells me this, and I'm like, whoa, how do I get to be number 1? So I viewed it negatively.
Right.
And he's like, whoa, hold on here. I'm not telling you this so you can try to be number 1. Like that's too hard to do. That's, this is a 4-year average of your GPA. That changing where you're at now, it's like moving the Titanic.
And most people hearing that would give up.
Probably.
Yeah.
It pissed me off. I'm like, oh, so you're saying I can't? And he's like, and he was frustrated because he's like, this didn't work out the way I wanted it to. And I'm like, I'm going to be number 1. And he's like, no, don't. And I'm like, I am. You watch. I will. And so that weekend, I remember we had a shower in that the Stepdad had installed in the projects, and we never really had showers before. So it was the memory is good because I actually was in a shower, and in the shower I had this fantasy of me being at a podium giving the valedictorian speech. I decided what I was going to say in this speech. And so that became this goal that drove me every single day. And so I essentially had, from the beginning of 10th grade to the beginning of 12th grade to change my grades enough to change that, to move the Titanic.
Right.
And so it was the first time in my life I really did this thing where like I had like this big goal and I had to break it down into little chunks. And so how do I get all those grades up? How do I do that for each? I had to do it for each test. Okay. So for each test, so I'm like making weekly schedules.
So you like reverse engineered.
Yes. Yeah. All the way down to what am I doing today? I work until after school until 5, then I get home, and what are the 3 hours of homework I'm going to do when no one else is doing it? And I was definitely, I became way overachiever. Like, you're writing a research paper. Most people are writing 5-6 pages. I would write 20. Like I really went above and beyond because I wanted that so bad. And then in 12th grade, about halfway through 12th grade, I guess it was after like the first semester, that same guidance counselor came up to me. I was in the library because I was a nerd. And he sat down across these old wooden tables and he said, "You did it, hot dog." I'm like, "Did what?" And he said, "You're number 1. You did it." And he walked away.
It's awesome.
So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
Because it was a very a specific goal, and it was instrumental in getting me scholarships. I got academic scholarships, even though I went to a school district that had no AP classes. It actually only has one honors class in the entire district. It was 12th grade honors English.
Wow.
Like the whole district was geared towards struggling kids or learning disabilities.
Right.
And whereas, like I see, Tyler, our son, his school district, really covers all the gamut. If you are a bright kid, you have all of the options.
Yes.
And if you have, a learning disability, you have all of the support, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the way it was
amazing.
Where I was. So I ended up getting a full scholarship to a Catholic university in Pittsburgh. And so that was where I went to college, and that was how I ultimately became a physician assistant. It was through that. So my escape route, my way out from this, multi-generational poverty was through a scholarship and going to college. And that's not, the answer for everybody, but for me, that was that answer.
Did you find, as you moved into adulthood, did you find that there were scar tissues or traumas from your youth that held you back or slowed you down as an adult?
Oh, yeah. It was both. Some of what I had been through gave me advantages.
Right.
Toxic people be gone, for example. Everyone else in college they were going to frat parties, and I didn't do any of that stuff because I was like, no, this is my one shot.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
you had a ruthless management of your time and your focus.
Yes. Like I could not mess this up because I would never get another opportunity like that again. So I had to make it work. So I did not do any of the things there were adult students who were like 40 years old who would come back to college to change their career.
Right.
I hung out with them because they were a lot more like me.
Sure.
And
that makes sense.
And they took it seriously like I did.
Right.
So there were good things that, my history, brought, that appeared in that transition period. But I didn't know how to communicate intelligently. I didn't know how to dress. I didn't know any of the social cues once you're getting into a professional world, because everyone I was around were drug addicts.
Yeah, you can't talk to doctors like that, I don't think.
No. I mean, it gives me advantages when I see a patient who has that background.
Yeah.
Because I can find ways to relate to them. But I had to learn how to speak different languages. Yeah. So I had to learn how to speak college kid. I had to learn how to speak professor. I had to learn how to integrate with, medical professionals and garner respect, because if you go in there talking like you're from the hood, they are not going to respect you as much. And so
Was that hard?
that was hard. I actively would watch other people, and then I had to train myself. I'll give you a solid example. This actually happened when I was 16. I actually had gone in front of the school board and spoke up about something horrible I had witnessed, and so I was like battling. I was in the newspapers. I was battling the school board. This lone kid, and I think I did really well. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but in that speech I gave, I said, well, you plural, right? You plural. Like if I were talking to a group of people, my mother says use.
Right.
Right. My sister says use. Everyone I know says use. So I'm in front of the school board saying use did this, and so I had my dialect was what I was from,
Sure.
and my English teacher stopped me the next day and she said, I respect you. That was incredible what you did. But if you talk like that, no one is ever going to give you the respect you deserve.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I challenge you to eradicate use from your vernacular. And I know that use is not you plural, because when I'm writing,
Right.
grammar is easy. It's kind of like diagramming a sentence is a math problem to me. So,
Right, exactly.
So it's very easy.
I love the way you think.
But but when I'm speaking, especially if I'm speaking emotionally and
Right.
passionately, I can't seem to control that. So, and she explained to me this lesson. She said, when you're trying to change a habit, you're going to go through 3 phases. The first phase is you will catch yourself immediately after you make the mistake. So each time you say use, it'll exit your mouth and you're going to say, oh, I did it. I did it again. And she goes, that's going to take a long time. You're going to do that for months. And she said, the second stage, you'll start to catch yourself as you're doing it, simultaneous. So you'll be in the process of saying use, guys, and you'll be catching yourself, but you can't stop it. And she said, the third stage, you will start to catch yourself just before you say it. And then finally, it'll just go away. But you have to be relentless. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of my self-projects when I was 16, was to eradicate the word use from my vernacular.
Awesome.
And it took about a year.
Wow.
And so I took that lesson, and as I was learning how to chameleon with these different groups of people, I took that kind of a lesson. So I would watch other people, hear how they talk, see how they carry themselves, what's their disposition, who are the people that get respect, who are the people that are looked down on. And I would kind of study them and learn, and then chameleon myself that way. And I even had to learn how to dress. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to dress in normal professional clothing.
Right. You're not serving at a pool hall anymore. You're
Right. And even serving at, when I tended a bar at a pool hall, I would always wear 90s tight jeans, a heavy metal T-shirt, and and I would get my tips and whatever. And one day, I wore one of my new professional outfits. It wasn't like a suit or anything. It was just like slacks and a nice shirt. It wasn't anything special, but it wasn't what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And my tips tripled.
Wow.
And I was like, the only thing that's different this night versus last night was what I'm wearing. And so it made me, I started to really pay attention to how I was dressing and how I was talking and communicating. I started to learn all of these social cues. So that was very hard for me to start to be able to get through and integrate into the circles. But I did that. Now I often wear jeans and a heavy metal T-shirt, and I don't give a damn.
Right. but at the same time, you can, and you are very good at being that chameleon and fitting in where you need to fit in. It's really cool. We can go to a tactical class and you fit in.
Right.
You can
People are like, were you in the military?
Right. You hear that a lot. I hear people ask you that all the time.
And like, no, nope. And but that's, I guess, maybe it's how I carry myself. And but then I can go into a group of doctors in training and give an educational seminar, and
none of them would have any idea of any of the story you just said.
No. In fact, most of the doctors I've worked with, if I at any point would start to let them in a little bit and say, oh yeah, I grew up in this kind of situation, or yeah, I grew up in a situation just like that patient, they would be shocked. Mm-hmm. I remember one guy, he was talking about a Metallica concert. And I had seen Metallica live so many times, I can't count, starting with the Justice CD. We were using CDs at that time. We graduated from cassette tapes.
That's
awesome. And he's like, Metallica? He's like, I would have pegged you for Shania Twain.
Oh, jeez.
But that was how I was presenting myself.
Right.
So anyway, the point is, part of this evolution I had to go through was learning what parts of myself do I keep? What parts do I want to present? What is real and authentic? What is kind of faking it?
Right.
And that was a long journey for me before I finally arrived at, this is who I am, and this is authentic me, and I could, adjust a little bit depending on what situation I'm in, which is very helpful.
Yes.
In survival as well as professional life. And but I still have a very strong core me that is pretty solid.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the authentic you is rock solid and never changes. It's how you accessorize
Right.
that authentic you.
I think that's a perfect
How you dress it up.
Right.
And it's a beautiful thing to see. So you're a physician assistant. You practiced for 16 years clinically.
Yes.
And we can get into some of those stories at another time. I know you've got some good ones and some hard ones. And so I know that you've also had some other amazing times as an adult and some other hard times as an adult. Mm-hmm. Walk me through some of those. I'll throw the ball in your court. Where do you want to go with it?
Okay. Well, I guess I think you asked me earlier, what are some of the good things I took from my upbringing? What are some of the bad things? One of the bad things, one of my biggest challenges was personal relationships. Mm-hmm. Dude, I rocked my career. Like, I've done phenomenal in my career.
Yeah.
My personal life, with relationships, was not so phenomenal. I think early, as a young adult, I had this. It's like I wanted a father figure. I didn't know it at the time, but right. In retrospect, I can see my behavior, who I was attracted to, whether they were like a mentor or a romantic relationship.
Right.
Like I was seeking a guy who had kind of a father figure, stability. I desperately wanted stability, and so I made wrong choices. And he wooed me. He took me all around the world. He did this thing where he, part of his trauma was he would feel like some woman is taking advantage of him, mm-hmm. and so then he would react to squash that.
Kind of a pendulum swing
yes.
kind of response.
Yes, and even when it's not happening, not that people, no one has ever taken advantage of him, but what he would do is he would take me to on a vacation to Aruba, and then he's there, and out of nowhere he thinks I don't appreciate him enough, and so then like the wrath comes out, and so it ended up being very abusive.
Yeah.
And I hate to use that word. I think it's overused in a lot of situations. But this...
I've heard this story. It's not overused.
He slowly isolated me from my family and my friends. And in every situation, there was some plausible reason about maybe they aren't as good for me as I thought they were. Mm-hmm. And I played into this, 'cause everyone has a part to play, right? My part was I accepted ownership and responsibility for what was happening. And he, he was putting it on me, this is happening because you're not good enough, because you didn't try hard enough. And so then I'm like, well, I have to try harder, and I have to, and so it became this vicious cycle. So he isolated me from essentially everybody except the peripheral professional people that I worked with. And there was this kind of slow eradication of my sense of self. And he would, it got to the point where he was telling me things like, you are worthless and nobody else will ever want you, so you better do what I need. And so like he eroded away on a personal level who I was. In fact, I was so proud of like what I had done, and he actually took that away too. Because I had, he's like, you worked so hard to get to be where you're at, but you're not looking forward enough. No one gives a crap about what you've done in the past. That's gone. It means nothing. So my sense of identity, he like was taking away from me. And ultimately, there was this emotional abuse, but it also became physical, and that was bad. The emotional abuse was way more damaging than the actual physical, but there were a lot of physical altercations too. And I actually have I made lists of them, and a lot of them, like I realized, like I wrote them in a diary, and so I found them later. Otherwise, I think I would have forgotten them because some things are so painful. I was blocking them out.
Right.
But he would do things like, I found this in the diary. We were in a big fight, and I'm like sitting on the floor in a hallway, just crying. And he was so angry that I was crying because clearly I'm just trying to get attention. And so he took kitchen shears and he slams them into the wall next to my face. And it like left a big hole in the wall where he like, so you picture me, I'm sitting on the floor, and he has like one hand next to my head, and the other hand he like slams these shears into the wall next to my face. And I'm just terrified. I mean, he was so much bigger than me.
Right.
And I turned into a mouse.
Yeah.
I thought I was like this strong, empowered person, and I allowed him to slowly erode that all away. And then he would do things like that, and I couldn't fight back. I was terrified. And what was I doing? I was reliving the stuff I saw my mother go through. Right?
Yeah.
Some psychologists have this theory that we recreate what we saw as kids because we want to solve it.
Right.
And so we put ourselves in the same darn situation, and we don't do it consciously, but this is how people end up, and we really want to fix it so that horrible wound can heal.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's why this happened. I don't know, but I definitely was reliving a lot of what I had seen as a kid, and then there was it escalated over time. No one knew what was. I had no close friends because I couldn't have any close friends.
Right.
So there was no one who actually knew what was really happening, and I was too ashamed. Like, I'm this person that overcame all these things, and like I was so ashamed of that, and I wouldn't even like admit it to myself. And there were two situations that were key in leading me to the next phase of life.
That's what I was going to ask about next.
Yeah. So one of them was, it was on Thanksgiving, because we always fought on holidays. I don't know why.
It's pretty common.
With domestic.
Yeah.
It was Thanksgiving, and I don't know why we were fighting, because I never even really knew why we were fighting. But we were fighting, and it got worse. If I would try to defend myself, then he would escalate higher, and that was usually how it went. If I didn't submit, he would, he would raise it up 5 levels, and I was arguing back. So it was getting really heated, and I think think I knocked something off of a table, is like this final act of defiance. And he throws me on the floor. It was a hardwood floor. He throws me on the floor, and the next thing I know, he's like, he has what I later learned is called mount,
Right.
And so he's kneeling over my chest, and he has his hands in my hair, and he's hitting my head off of the floor repeatedly. Wow. I don't even know how many times it happened. I have no idea. And all I know is, like, in slow motion, I thought, this is how I die. This is how it's going to end. And then, he stopped with the head banging. I didn't die.
Yeah.
And there was a lot more yelling, like, in my face, and it wasn't over, but I just submitted. And after that, I was sitting around thinking, I'm like, it's getting bad. So how's this gonna play out, like, logically, because he's never going to jail. He's already showed me where he's gonna bury me.
What do you mean by that?
So he would do things like as a joke. He took me out, like, behind these trees behind the house, and he said, right here, this, I think, is the perfect place for where I'm going to bury you. And then he, like, laughs. And so, was it a joke? He's giving himself plausible deniability.
Right.
But it was more than that, right? So
I've never heard that joke before. I don't think that's a common joke.
Right. He would reference it frequently.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, how is this going to play out? Because he's not going to go to jail. So either I'm going to end up 6 feet under in that spot, and no one's ever going to find me, and he's going to come up with some story about how I disappeared, and he's going to try to cover it up. Or it's going to be like a double murder-suicide.
Right.
Because he'll do that before he goes to jail.
Yeah.
And
so you're thinking through this, like, calm-minded and logically.
Yeah, it was just logic. Like, this is, what are the steps? What's coming next?
Yeah.
And so, when I arrived at there's a chance of double murder-suicide, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, whoa, what, you're actually sitting here thinking about this as the logical next steps. What the hell is wrong with you? Mm-hmm. Like if it was a third person looking in.
Like waking you up.
Yeah, like, this is fucking bad.
Yeah.
You've got to get out of this.
Yeah.
And that was like the moment that I finally woke up and realized there is no way to fix this. There is nothing I can do.
You can't try hard enough. You can't be good enough.
No, there's nothing that I can do to set a goal and change in myself to make this better. There is no way except escape. So within a week or two, I sought out a women's shelter, and I wasn't ready to leave yet because he had tried to control me financially too by moving money around and make it so I can't get away, right? That's part of this.
It's part of the isolation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's part of the control.
Right.
And so I started going to, like, a support group there, and I saw a counselor and a lawyer, and I started finding out what are the laws about this. I started recognizing my pattern of behavior. I learned that I had this. Part of the reason I stayed so long is because I had this view that this is what happens to poor people in bad situations with drugs. So this can't really be happening to me. I left all that behind.
Right.
And what I learned going to this support group is that's bullshit.
Yeah.
There were women who were a lot richer than I will ever be, right? There were women there who were professionals. There were women there who were on welfare. It didn't matter what race you were, what age you were, the only denominator was we were all women. And so I learned that I was being very unfair to myself by thinking that I had left that behind. In reality, I just recreated it in a new relationship. And there was no way to fix it. No matter what I would do, the pattern of an abuser is they just move the carrot. So you make this adjustment in yourself, like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so then you're succeeding, and then they move the carrot. And so they're just always making it out of your reach, so you can never be good enough. And so I learned all these things, and I came up with a plan, came up with a battle plan. And so at work, because he, didn't go into my workspace, I was able to, like on lunch breaks and stuff, I wrote out my battle plan of all the things I needed to do to prepare for my exit. And that was actually during this, I uncovered more of this money moving that he had done without me knowing.
Wow.
And so I made those kind of preparations. I also was, I was getting police reports from times that the cops were called on us to demonstrate a pattern of abuse. Mm-hmm. And so I could have that for whenever I tried to I learned what a protection from abuse order is. Mm-hmm. And so I had to learn all these laws and how this all works. And then I found a place to live. So I had to line this all up. And what happened was he went out of town for my birthday. He was going to Chicago for a business meeting, and it was on my birthday. And so that was the day. I had the new place set up, and it was a tiny little place not far from my mom on a private road that the local fire department and police department didn't even know existed until I went in. I made sure they all knew. FedEx didn't know where I was. Like, wow. It was pretty wild. And so I had everything lined up, and he went out of town. As soon as he was in the air, I finally had told my family what was really happening. We rented a moving truck. We ran into the house. Nothing could be packed because
he would know.
I had to pretend to still be mousy. I learned that it is during the act of leaving that that an abuser is most likely to kill the spouse because they're losing control. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like really impressed upon me, do not act strong as you're leading up to this. You must act the same. And so I did.
Right.
And so on my birthday, my family came in. I ran around putting blue tape on, and I was very careful. Like, this is mine because I bought it. And I didn't want to take anything that was his. Because I was still afraid of making him mad.
Right.
And so I put tape on the things that were mine. And they loaded up the truck. And I left. That was some of the hardest stuff I've ever been through.
Yeah. If you were, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. If there are women listening that are finding themselves in similar situations, what advice would you have for them?
The first thing is they need a tribe because they're probably isolated. And the women's shelter was so helpful to me in getting those resources. And I had to lie about where I was when I was going there, but the support group and the legal counsel and the psychology, I guess it was a counselor, like these things helped me so much. And once I had kind of a tribe, that's what gave me the strength. And I also learned that, friends and family members that I had isolated from, most of them came back with open arms. And I didn't think they would. I thought they would be like, you burned me, screw off.
Because you pushed them away.
Yeah.
Earlier, and probably pretty harshly at times.
Yeah.
But they
knew
maybe saw what was happening.
They knew it
and
was
maybe
happening.
Had some grace.
They absolutely knew what was happening, and they did have grace. So they, I won't say all of them, but most of them once they realized I was on that trajectory, they came back with open arms and were there to help me. So I guess if there's anybody out there who finds themselves in this position, you know, the first thing is reestablish that tribe. And, you know, if the situation is this bad, I don't think there's any way to fix it, because that other individual, they have their own, the issue is they have to fix themselves, and that woman has to also fix herself, because she had a role to play.
Right.
You know, because it would be great if I could blame this all on him. And in a lot of things, that's easy to do, right? I didn't make him slam me on the ground many times. I didn't make him do those things. But I played a part.
Yeah, I think if anyone heals enough where they can look at themselves honestly in retrospect, they can see where they played into it. I know I can with my ex.
Right.
You know, I played into it, and I allowed her to control me and manipulate me. But it takes a degree of healing and maturity to be able to see that in yourself. And that can be really, really hard to do.
It was very hard. And I think it took me about 10 years, actually, before I got to a point where, like, I felt, like, truly healed, like, where I'm not going to recreate this again. And it was a lot of work. And so when I had first escaped, I was obviously an emotional wreck. Somehow I was still able to do well at my job, at my career. I think it's because that was where I could focus and not have to think about all this hurtful stuff. And so I just would dig in and do what I needed to do. But I went out and got in another relationship with a good guy. And I messed it up. And that was hard, because it's easy to blame my ex, you know, the abuser. But now I'm in a situation where I'm creating the drama. And it really fell squarely on my shoulders. I know that I did it. And so then I had to look at myself, like, honestly, like, what are you doing? You're with a good person. They don't deserve this drama. They don't deserve this crap you're putting them through. And so I was single for a very long time. And then I did start dating here and there. I tried to wait until I found the right person instead of, like, you know, sticking a round peg into a square hole. I eventually dated a guy who was what I kind of more of a beta guy. And
the opposite of...
Yeah, like the opposite. Yeah. And I remember I was like, I'm not really attracted to him. I don't know about this. And a buddy of mine was like, Jess, are you just going to keep finding, like, these tough guys who want to beat you up? Why don't you give this guy a chance?
Yeah. Logically, it makes sense.
Right. But I have since heard a quote from Jordan Peterson that nails this on head. And I'm going to paraphrase it. But he said, if you think a strong man is dangerous, just wait until you see what a weak man can do.
Yeah.
And so I luckily got out of that situation. But ultimately, I think I did start to see what my patterns of behavior are, and I was able to change them. And so then when you and I started dating, I don't think I carried any of that shit into our relationship at all. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I did.
No, I think that I think if that scar tissue was still there, there's no way you would have been able to, one, trust me, and two, put up with the bullshit I was doing, as I was full of all of my own scar tissue, and I was not healed. Right. I was very broken. And, when we first started dating, it was not because you saw someone that you could fix, and I wasn't looking to be fixed.
No.
However, the experiences that you had gone through and healed from gave you the tools to share those experiences with me and allow me to heal. And you did so in a way where, I was coming out of a spot where I was very manipulated, I was very emotionally twisted, and I was very sensitive to the possibility that you would be manipulating me too. And I don't know how, in retrospect, you did what you did. The patience and insight and the way you loved me, you held my heart tenderly. As I was trying to do the same, but often not as well. It was beautiful. But had you not healed, it would have been disastrous. So no, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think any of those old scar tissues or baggage affected the way our relationship started. Now, you and I both still have times when old scar tissue comes up. And we have...
But we're aware that something's amiss.
Right.
Right? Like how often I'll have an emotional reaction to something and it's out of proportion to what is normal, and that's all I know. So sometimes I can't tell, especially when it comes to my ex, like, am I reacting appropriately? Like, am I justified in being angry with what just happened? Or is this scar tissue manifesting?
Right.
And so I would have to say to you, like, okay, here's what just happened. I can't tell if this is like drama scar tissue or if I'm appropriate.
Right.
And I would have to bounce it off of you.
Right.
But I at least had the awareness of when I'm not aware.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an amazing thing. And
But for you, when we first started dating, my soul knew your soul. I knew you were this very good person that was trying to heal and was struggling. And I knew that you were right for me. And I knew it was going to take many months or even a year or two before you trusted me. And I was okay with that. It was a big risk.
yeah.
But there's just something about your soul that knew mine. And so you were worth it.
Yeah. I can clearly say the same. If we're going to look for the lesson in this, is looking for the lesson?
Yeah, I think so. No matter what happens, there's a lesson in it. If you have somebody who is sexually abusing you, there's a lesson there. If you have a father teaching you from a satanic Bible while he's feeding you drugs, there's a lesson there. It may not be obvious at first, but you have a choice in how you're going to respond to it. One of my favorite books, I read it in college. It's by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Absolutely.
And this guy was in the Holocaust, and he's in a concentration camp. I think it was Auschwitz.
It was in Auschwitz.
And he lost his family. He presumed them to be, he knew they were dead, like somehow spiritually he kind of knew. And everything was taken from him, down to the point where he's nothing but skin and bones, and he's starving to death. And people all around him were dying when they gave up. They just dropped dead. Like everything was gone. And somehow he found meaning. he realized that they could take everything from him, but they can't take away how he responds to it. It's the one thing no one can take from you. And that's kind of how I see it. No matter what is happening, you have a choice to remain victim-minded and see yourself as a victim, or you have a choice to respond to it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And say, what's the next healthy step? And so every time you and I have some crappy thing happen, when we can get emotionally, stuck in it, and
We've
we're
had
like,
some practice with this.
right. One of us will be like, all right, what's the next healthy step?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's too much. You can't think 4 years in the future. All you can think about is what's the next step.
Right.
But it has to be a healthy one.
Right.
And the other thing we do, you've said on other podcasts, is this, have a great day thing. We do that every day. We will say to each other, make it great. And we mean that.
Yeah. It's not a platitude or a catchphrase.
No, it's a choice.
Yeah.
That people look at us like, how are you handling this cancer thing and staying positive and wanting to keep exercising? James, how are you doing this? And Jess, why aren't you like a basket case over, your husband having cancer?
Well, we have those days.
Yeah, we do.
But it's
we
a
don't.
choice.
Yeah, we don't stay there.
Yeah.
You can feel those feelings, and sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
But you still have a choice how you're going to respond. So we choose to make it great.
I love it. Anything else to add as you look back on
Jeez,
things
that was
you want to
pretty
share?
heavy.
Yeah.
I went through some heavy stuff.
Yeah. All right, I'll put you on the spot again, and you may not have an answer.
Okay.
Single greatest memory, or one that comes to mind right away.
Oh, instantly it was summoning Kilimanjaro. I'm going to make that a whole dedicated podcast because it's a great story. Because that was when I really, for the first time in my life, learned that your body could be completely done. Nothing left. I was literally passing out in hypoxic, needed oxygen. And if your mind is strong enough, your body can go a little further.
I love it.
And a little further.
And that probably has carried you through, I'm certain it has, from different experiences we've shared.
Yes.
The reality TV show you were on.
Yes.
There was a number of different things.
Which was called Unbreakable Mind.
Right.
Right.
So that's awesome. We'll dig into that one on an episode by itself.
Awesome.
So for you guys watching, if any of this stood out to you or you found it to be helpful, I want you to make comments in the YouTube channel and give us some feedback. What did you like? What didn't you like? And if there's something you want us to dig deeper into, let us know. There's a whole lot more that we plan on talking about, and we're going to take each of these lessons and break them down into their own stories. But man, I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd like to hear what you guys think. So that's it for today, and until next time, make it great.